Have you ever wanted a home that feels completely private? Not cut off from the world, but protected. Because that's exactly what this house is. From the street, it looks like a solid block of rusted steel. No windows, and no clues as to what's inside. So you'd never guess that there's a courtyard or that sunlight floods almost every room. But that's the point here, because this home flips the idea of open living completely on its head. Because it doesn't open up to the world, it opens inward. And by the end of this video, you're gonna see how this house solves a question that every designer and architect faces, which is how do you make a space feel open without giving up your privacy? So looking at the facade of the home here, you can tell immediately that the geometry of this home is brutally simple, right? It's just a single rectangular volume with precise cutouts for the entry here in the middle left section and the garage on the right. And the steel corten cladding, which wraps around the entire home, and that's this, reddish brown color, it isn't flat. It's actually ribbed, kind of like, you can think of it like an egg carton. And so what that means is that it catches the light differently as the day goes on, right? And you can see here with these beautiful shadows casting from the trees around it, it gives it a little bit of subtle texture without needing any ornament. Of course, as I say that, there's also this striking green mosaic, which breaks the otherwise monochromatic field and just adds an element of surprise and craftsmanship that softens the industrial feel of this building, because otherwise it could be mistaken just for kind of an enlarged shipping container. And the gravel landscape that surrounds the home, in my view, just mirrors the simplicity of the facade, because everything is reduced to shape, texture, and tone. And even the cactus garden here kind of reads like a bit of architectural punctuation, right? They could have planted some beautiful flowers or shrubs here, but instead they went with something that is just so utilitarian, which I think really speaks to the philosophy behind this home. And it's also worth noting that the privacy here is palpable, right? Because there are no visible windows. And in fact, I'll show you in a minute here when we look at look at this from a few different angles, there are no windows on this home. So you can walk 360 degrees around it and not even see a sliver of what's inside. Instead there's just the suggestion that there is life behind these closed doors. Now, if we kind of twist the camera here, then you can see that this house is actually sitting on a really narrow, just gravel laneway, which in my view emphasizes the contrast between its rough surroundings and the refined minimalism of the structure itself. And this steel box is like a protective shell, right? In a sense, it's almost like an oversized turtle that's been plopped down right in the middle of this, residential area. And, the way it meets the ground with no visible foundation line here just enhances that sealed feeling. It's like a bunker that's been brought above ground and, has exposed itself to the world. Now, one thing that I think is really beautiful here is that the green mosaic panel actually glows a little differently when you look at it from this angle, right? You can see how it interacts with the sunlight, changing its tone from this kind of dull olive color to something that's almost golden. And this perspective line from the driveway just leads your eye directly into the dark void, which is the entrance of this home, right? And so it's a bit of a cinematic moment of contrast between the openness of the surroundings and the mystery of what's inside. All right, so let's open up that door and step inside here now. And starting with the kitchen, you can see that the dominant material here is walnut. And there's this continuous grain matching across all the cabinetry, which gives the entire wall a seamless furniture-like quality rather than a typical kitchen install. Now, the backsplash tile is this really nice earthy green-gray with a bit of a matte finish, and so it adds texture without any reflection, which grounds the white surfaces above it and keeps the palette cohesive with the corten steel outside. But in my view, it's actually not the backsplash that becomes the visual anchor. It's this big white island, the waterfall counter that introduces some crisp geometry and kind of a contrasting cool tone against the warmth of the surrounding wood. You can just imagine that as the sun sets and the room gets darker here, that this is going to cast a really nice soft glow through the kitchen, which is perfect for winding down with a glass of wine at the end of the night. We've got the same backsplash tile behind the nook, which connects it back to the main kitchen, and the bench bases here are solid and squared, which just echoes the home's rectilinear architectural language, because there's no legs and no clutter. And speaking of the architectural language of this home, I actually want to show you a few drawings so you can get a better understanding of what's going on here. So the site plan here shows just how tight this lot is. It's wedged between other people's backyards and this gravel alleyway, And so it means that the architects had to be really creative when designing this home. And it's largely due to that close proximity to the surrounding homes that they had to think differently in how they built this one. And so what that meant was that privacy was extremely important, but in order to achieve something that still felt open and welcoming, they couldn't look outward, they had to look inward. And so if we zoom in here to the floor plan, you can immediately read the concept of this home. Perfect rectangle punctured by 2 courtyards. The larger courtyard with the olive tree has become the literal and emotional center of the home, and all of the main rooms face it and receive light through it. And then the 2 bedrooms are set on opposite corners of the home for maximum privacy. Now, if we move on to the massing diagram here, you can get an even better understanding of the constraints that this home was under. Because number one, the buildable area was just 1,800 square feet, which is not large for a home in Austin, Texas like this one. But even more so, because this is technically an accessory dwelling unit, or ADU, there are even more strict size limits on what you're able to build. And specifically, that means a maximum of 200 square feet of garage space and 1,100 square feet of interior space. And so in order to build something spectacular but still meet all these requirements, the architects had to think outside the box. And speaking of outside the box, you can see the home from all 4 angles here. And like I said a minute ago, you can tell that there are 0 exterior windows here. So regardless of how close this is to the surrounding homes, it is completely private from the outside. But that doesn't mean it doesn't get a ton of light. As you can see here, the kitchen we just saw a minute ago opens directly to the courtyard through this full height glass. And the olive tree sits like a piece of art in the center of that void. The glass is frameless on its lower edge, which just creates this feeling that the interior floor simply continues outdoors. And the material consistency here is quite striking, with the Corten steel panels outside and the walnut cabinetry inside. You know, there's a lot of warm tones that echo each other across that glass. And if we look at the courtyard from a slightly different angle, then you can see that the symmetry is nearly perfect, right? Glass walls on both sides, the Corten panels enclosing the space, and a clear band of sky overhead. And I think they made a really smart decision here with keeping the ground planting restrained. You know, using these rhythmic rows of grasses and the black river stones that frame the soil, it just matches the building's clean sense of repetition. And then the light that comes into the home is diffused and calm because it enters indirectly from above and bounces off the Corten steel, which creates this amber glow on the tree canopy. And I can't help but sense the quietness here because the glass acts like an acoustic buffer and just gives the feeling of an enclosed meditative garden. And then at night, the lighting shifts completely and redefines the space because the courtyard becomes this luminous core, almost like a nuclear reactor or something, which glows against the darker interior of the home surrounding it. The uplighting on the tree creates a gentle canopy of shadows on the ceiling and turns the architecture of the home itself into part of the lighting composition. And again, the Corten walls reflect the warm light back inward into the home, producing this burnished golden kind of tone, and the metal almost looks like it's on fire at night. And so it shows how the house flips its relationship to light in a really interesting way, because by day it captures the sunlight, but by night it emits it. And so in my view, the effect is kind of theatrical, because nature becomes the lighting feature, not just a backdrop. And if we flip the perspective here and look from the courtyard into the home, you can see just how close everything is and how peaceful it must feel, especially in the evenings, to sit right next to so much nature just outside your window. So if we go around the corner into the master bedroom, you can see how it acts as a quiet extension of the courtyard. The palette here is intentionally desaturated with soft neutrals, the pale oak floors, and the textured wall covering, which allows the greenery outside to be the dominant color in the room. And the built-in shelving and display unit here are clearly custom made, and they integrate lighting, storage, and a nice sense of visual rhythm all in a single vertical plane. And you can also see how the desk lines up perfectly with the doorway to the courtyard beyond. And this alignment pulls your eye outward and visually enlarges the space for anyone who's sitting or working at that desk. And unsurprisingly, the material palette here quietly repeats the rest of the house. So warm wood, tactile fabric, and some subtle plant life. And so that sense of continuity replaces any sort of contrast, which creates a total sense of calm. Now, you already saw part of the living room a minute ago, but this is the most complete view of the living space, and it shows how the sectional wraps the corner to mirror the perimeter of the glass walls. Now, what I find really interesting here is that the living room is actually wedged between the 2 courtyards. The one large squarish courtyard that we just looked at, on kind of in the middle of the home, and then the longer rectangular courtyard on the one side of the home. And so What it means is that when you're sitting in the living room, you're getting light in from all angles. But still at the same time, you're still kind of within that protective shell of the home. And so it's fully private with zero possibility of anyone looking in. The rug and pillows here add a deliberate burst of color, but it's still anchored in earthy tones, right? We've got some reds and blues, but they're a little more washed out so that they don't shock your eye when they see them, but they actually just fit in with the natural feel of this home. And then this art piece on the wall with its green and rust palette just subtly mirrors the exterior of the home. Now, a couple details to note here. First, you can see that there's been a lot of thought in the proportion of this space. For example, the horizontal line of the shelving matches the height of the windowsill, so the eye just runs uninterrupted across the room. And the choice of white sofa fabric is pretty strategic as well, because it reflects light deep into the home and keeps the space bright even when there are no external windows, since a lot of natural light will have to come in from a pretty steep angle. And the repeated colors here just tie the whole composition together, with terracotta outside, ochre and green inside, and it's all balanced by this beautiful pale timber. And so the overall mood here is serene but alive, because the geometry provides plenty of order, but the textures provide humanity. And now as we move into the bathroom here, I love that this home's most intimate space is still treated with the same architectural rigor as all the public spaces. For example, the wall tile is a small mosaic, but it's in really dark, rich tones, which creates this jewel box-like quality, which is quite a contrast to the open, airy rooms elsewhere throughout the home. Also, the window to the bamboo garden transforms what could feel enclosed into something tranquil and meditative. And all the details have been thought of here, all the way down to the color of the towels, which is this beautiful olive brown, which just echoes the Corton hues outside. And so nothing breaks the visual rhythm in here, and everything feels totally cohesive. Now, if we look at the bathroom vanity here, you can see that it's using the same walnut tone that we saw in the kitchen and throughout the rest of the home. And the lighting globes and matte black fixtures are also very similar to what we see in the kitchen, but more importantly, you can see how the light from the courtyard reaches all the way to the bathroom, which keeps it bright and functional as well. So zooming out here for a second, we talk a lot about openness in architecture and interior design. Open plans, open facades, and open views. But openness isn't always about exposure. Sometimes, openness is about control, choosing what you reveal and what you protect. And this home is a study in that exact balance. It doesn't reject the outside world, it just curates it. And it's decided that nature should be experienced on your terms, that daylight should enter where you need it, and that beauty doesn't have to announce itself to be real. And in doing that, it becomes so much more than a house. It becomes a kind of retreat from noise, from surveillance, and from the need to perform. It's not a house that says, "Look at me." It's a house that asks, "How do you want to live?" And so when you stand in this home's courtyard, surrounded by weathered steel and filtered light, you start to realize this is what architecture can do when it isn't trying to impress anyone. It can be quiet, it can be deliberate, and it can make small spaces feel infinite, not by expanding outward, but by turning inward and deepening the experience of what's already there. Because this house isn't about scale, it's about intention. And it proves that privacy can be luxurious, that stillness can be powerful, and that a house doesn't have to face the world to feel completely alive. So if you like these walkthroughs of beautiful homes, then I think you're also going to like this video up here, where I look at a 500 square foot New York apartment to understand why it feels so big. I'll see you there.